Welcome back. Hello, Drew. I know we're still wandering in from lunch. I hope you had a pleasant one. It's a lovely day out there. But we get, again, because of the streaming, we want to be prompt on our start and stop time. We've got a panel this afternoon with Stephen Moore and then O'Neill Van Horn, who's back there somewhere coming quickly, and Melanie Johnson DeBalfrey with me as respondent. We're going to go ahead and start. I know we're going to have people filtering in over the next 15 or 20, but welcome to academic life. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen.
Thanks, Rob. Oh, that's working, yes. Yeah. I'm supposed to introduce myself? Yes, I'm Stephen Moore, teach New Testament here, have done for many a year, but not just New Testament. Let's see. There. Okay, so the damned earth and the necro-apocalypse of John. The first word of the last book of the Christian Bible is apocalypse. That first word is also its final occurrence in this book. But it turns out to be a territorializing word of world-engulfing immensity. At first, the word was content to cannibalize the book whose incipit it was becoming through the early centuries of its inhumanly long life, the book's title, The Apocalypse of John. In the process, however, the work itself became a book-length definition of its opening word. And from there, the word moved restlessly, voraciously to other books, other ancient Jewish books, other early Christian books. In time, the word cut loose from its bookish tethers altogether, becoming, by the mid-19th century, an event resulting in catastrophic damage or irreversible change to human society or the environment, especially on a global scale, a cataclysm. For more than a century and a half then, and ever more insistently, the word apocalypse has announced itself whenever mega catastrophe has erupted, such tribulation invariably sending certain of its sufferers back to the book bearing the word as its title in order to make sense of the suffering by making sense of the book. But mainly, the word floats free of the book and in its territorializing insatiability permits itself to be plugged into the personal trivial no less than the planet threatening. Within the social media sustained ecosystem of Gen X or Gen Alpha, for instance, one might begin one's day with a wardrobe apocalypse caused by a dirty laundry apocalypse and compounded by a bad hair apocalypse, or, you know, a bad beard apocalypse, that's even worse. Now spread vanishingly thin, apocalypse is both everywhere and nowhere. But back to the book that bears its name. There we go. The eponymous first word of the book, the word apocalypsis, whose prodigious peregrinations we have been tracking, did not originally mean cataclysm, catastrophe, or crisis. As it happens, rather it meant uncovering, unveiling, or revealing. But what does revelation reveal? It reveals much and conceals much, as we shall see, and the concealing is as consequential as the revealing. But what Revelation most palpably reveals, it seems to me, is violence, spectacular violence, apocalyptic violence, as we are wont to say. What Revelation repeatedly reveals indeed, is that it is the most violent book in the Christian Bible. How should we theorize Revelation's ultra-extravagant hyperviolence? Which illuminating texts should we place beside it? Better, which texts and contexts should we plug into it in order to cause it to light up? Deleuze and Guattari long ago cautioned us to keep the connecting cord handy. A book is a little machine, they insisted, and so the operative question for reading it is precisely the question of operation. What other machine, what other machines, the literary machine, can be plugged into, must be plugged into in order to work. Those other machines are not only other textual machines, they include other assemblages, orders of magnitude, more complex than literary assemblages, even entire empires, and not even comfortably removed empires at a distance, like the Roman, but uncomfortably all-enveloping contemporary empires like the American. But let's begin modestly by plugging into another text, albeit a text about empire, or more properly, sovereignty. Achille Mbembe's Necropolitics. Sovereignty, writes Mbembe, is predominantly the right to kill. More precisely, sovereignty resides in the power to dictate who may live and who must die, a capacity Mbembe names necropower. In Revelation, sovereign necropower is concentrated in the faceless being whose principal name is a metonymic non-name, the one seated on the throne. This sovereign throne being and its agents engage in recurring mass killing of human and other animals. Mountains of moldering corpses tower over many of the necro-apocalypsis chapters, a necrotic abomination that becomes a horrid flesh feast in 19, 17, and 18. Come gather for the great supper of God, to eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of the mighty, the flesh of horses and their riders, flesh of all, both free and slave, both small and great. Mbembe describes necropower as a specific terror formation, and the human terror the throne being's mass slaughter ignites is graphically illustrated early on in that rampage. Then the kings of the earth and the magnates and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone, slave and free, hid in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling on the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of the one seated on the throne and from the face of the wrath, and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand. So, apologies for that sign, but I somehow always think of that when I read this passage, and when I read the phrase, the wrath of the Lamb, for those of you who are old enough to remember, the killer rabbit from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, yes. But the climactic exercise of sovereign necropower in Revelation concerns not the still living, but the already dead, as we are about to see. For Bembe, we recall the ultimate expression of sovereignty is simultaneously the ultimate expression of necropower, since it concerns capacity to dictate who may live and who must die. Thus, we are led trembling to Revelation 20, 11 through 15. Then I saw a great white throne and the one who sat in it. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. And another book was opened, the book of life, and anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. Being cast into a lake of fire would ordinarily result in near instantaneous death. But these people are already dead, which is why John calls this incineration the second death. And it will be far from instantaneous. The devil, the beast, and the false prophet have already been thrown into the lake of fire, we are told, where they will be, quote, tortured night and day forever and ever. Revelation earlier pronounced the same sentence on the human damned. They will be tortured with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb, and the smoke of their torture goes up forever and ever. Cut back to Bembe, for whom modern necropower entails, quote, the creation of death worlds, new and unique forms of social existence in which vast populations are subjected to conditions of life, conferring upon them the status of living death. Already in 2003, for Bembe, Palestine was the signal site of necropower in the contemporary world. Plugging Bembe's pronouncements once more into John's necroapocalypse, we see in its last judgment scene the creation of a death world inhabited by the living dead, kept alive but in a state of injury, as Bembe might say, but all too mildly in this instance, in, quote, a phantom-like world of horrors and intense cruelty. The scenes in Revelation we have been revisiting, indeed, might be said to serve as grotesque, cartoonish renditions of the necropolitical machinations of our contemporary world. Look no further than these contemporary United States. Numerous academic studies have deployed the necropolitics concept to analyze the Trump phenomenon. Dean Caivano's The Necro President is a notable case in point. For Caivano, Donald J. Trump, most egregiously in his second term, operates as a kind of symbolic summarization of the necropolitical, and as such may be styled the necro-president or even the necro-sovereign. Where the necro-political refers to a mode of governance that deploys death as a strategy, the necro-president is the executive embodiment of its logic, his primary instruments being violent spectacle and wrathful retribution. A judge of judges above all judges, he presumes to situate himself beyond the law like an absolute monarch, but also like a would-be deity. And from that quasi-celestial pedestal, He declares himself sole arbiter of which lives are to be deemed valuable and which expendable, who to let live and who to let die, the preeminent necropolitical prerogative. What happens when we plug the necro-presidency into the necro-apocalypse? From his white house become the bastion of white Christian nationalism, the eyes of the necro-sovereign might be imagined to rise covetously to the great white throne. And I saw a great white throne, and the one seated on it, from whose face earth and heaven fled. Revelation 20:11. Meanwhile, the necro-apocalypse is just as reflexively rushing to engulf the necro-president in its voracious maw. But the role Revelation has scripted for Trump is not the God role. Rather, it could only ever be the beast role. That, after all, is what Revelation is. That is what Revelation does, has always done with human despots. It is not that Revelation's beast, has, with inhuman patience, been waiting in the wings all these centuries to finally sink its fangs into Donald J. Trump. No, it has feasted sumptuously in the interim, aggressively so since the Reformation, on an august procession of popes, dictators of every stripe, and previous US presidents. But the beast is finding more to ingest, to digest in the necro-president than in any previous occupant of the Oval Office. Not only does the necro-sovereign demand a fanatical loyalty from his devotees that is tantamount to worship, and not only are his leading acolytes united in yielding their power and authority to him, but his speech is boastful beyond measure. And not only does his head bear the scars, metaphorically speaking, of numerous self-inflicted wounds that would be mortal for any other American president. But he even incurred an actual head wound while campaigning for his second term, which came within an inch or two of proving mortal, and served significantly to propel him back into office. Fight, 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 he roared at his worshippers as, blood streaming down his face, he was wrestled from the stage by his bodyguards. Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? The beast's worshippers exclaimed in awe and voted him back into office. In short, the US necro-president delivered a virtuoso performance as Revelation's beast. But Trump's comfort in the role also signals the insufficiency of necropolitics and necropower as concept to unlock Revelation. The book's deity is indeed an emblem of necropower, consummately so when seated on the great white throne and separating those destined for eternal life from those condemned to eternal death. But the book itself does not flow from a position of power. Otherwise, its beast emperor, whether an ancient ruler of the Roman Empire, the current ruler of the American Empire, or any beast-eligible ruler in between, would not be consigned to the lake of fire and sulfur, but rather would be seated side by side with the judge on the great white throne, just as Emperor Augustus is seated side by side with the goddess Roma, elevated above the earth in the early 1st century icon of Roman imperial propaganda, known as the Gemma Augustea. Instead, the being who shares the throne with God in Revelation is the Lamb, as in, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, 22:1. Revelation's less and more than human emblem for the Jewish peasant nonentity, crucified and hence animalized by the Roman state. I saw a lamb standing as though it had been slaughtered, 5:6, but now elevated vertiginously above every and any Roman emperor. The Lamb is Lord of Lords and King of Kings, 17:14. Again, Revelation does not itself flow downward from the pinnacle of hegemonic power. Rather, it flows outward. It bleeds outward from beneath that obliterating bulk. To properly grasp this, we need to plug the book of the conquered, that is Revelation, into another book of the conquered. Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, or to translate its French title more scrupulously and more applicably, The Damned of the Earth, which is a book that so many of my international students from former colonies have been teaching me how to read. The colonial world is a world cut in two, Fanon insists. So dichotomized indeed is this world that it is inhabited by two different species. So systemically does the colonizer dehumanize the colonized as to open up an ontological chasm between them. Fanon's name for the world-sundering colonial project is Manichaeism. The dualistic cosmology of ancient Manichaeism, its dichotomization of light and darkness, of good and evil, is homologous for Fanon with the dualistic psychopathology of colonialism, its dichotomization of whiteness and blackness, of good and evil. Revelation's representation of the relationship between the dominant and the dominated are also quintessentially Manichaean in the Fanonian sense. Yeah. Is that the right one? Yeah. Okay. Within Revelation's hyper-dualistic narrative cosmos, all human beings are either stamped with the seal of the living God or branded with the mark of the beast. And yet, neither John nor Fanon present us with a top-down Manichaean colonial world. That unreconstructed hierarchical world vision belongs to the Roman Empire, to its heirs, the European empires, and to the heirs of those heirs, not least the Trumpian American empire. Rather, what Fanon and John present us with is a counter-vision that Fanonian commentators have termed an inverted Manichaeism, a reverse Manichaeism, or a counter-Manichaeism. Fanon himself articulates it graphically. Quote, the violence of the colonial regime and the counter-violence of the native balance each other and respond to each other in an extraordinary reciprocal homogeneity. And again, terror, counter-terror, violence, counter-violence. that is the circle of hate. Terror, counter-terror, Hamas, Israel, violence, counter-violence, Israel, the United States, Iran. That is the circle of neocolonial and necropolitical hate that currently burns most visibly in our own dichotomized, on our own dichotomized geopolitical horizon. But the necroapocalypse forever has a fire on hand, a counter-Manichaean conflagration that burns brighter still. The beastly emperor, ever newly named, together with the legion of those who worship his image, must be plunged into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur, not to be instantaneously incinerated, we noted earlier, but to be subjected to unutterable torments eternally. It is tempting to construe the sulfur element in the fire and sulfur formula as the consummate immoderation, the most atrocious excess in the necroapocalypse's exuberant, inverse Manichaean returning of the Roman imperial order and every other imperial order that has marched after the Roman order with ever more awful military might. That innocuously named lake, viewed literally, would be a raging inferno of blue-flamed hyperheat, melting the sulfur into a lava-like liquid, the entire conflagration wreathed in toxic SO2 gas and sulfuric acid fog. Yet those cast into it are unable to die by it, live an eternal and infernal death in life within it. For Fanon, colonial history is, quote, the history of men damned by other men, hence the title of his magnum opus. Revelation's lake of fire and sulfur is, however, an alchemical crucible that turns that history of colonized people damned by colonizing people into a counter-history of the colonizer now damned by the colonized. What fuels the lake of fire and sulfur? Yeah, what fuels the lake of fire and sulfur? What flows into it incessantly, reigniting it, is an incombustible rage for revenge. The, quote, legitimate desire for revenge that Fanon articulates on behalf of the colonized. My blood calls for the blood of the other. My death calls for the death of the other. Runs rampant in the necroapocalypse. Sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long will it be before you judge and avenge our blood on the inhabitants of the earth? The martyr souls under the heavenly altar cry out. The martyr's thirst for vengeance seemingly ignites the sovereign's own thirst for vengeance. It washes over the entire earth. As Revelation's plot rushes forward, sovereign power becoming sovereign necropower, overspilling every distinction between guilty human life and innocent human life, between guilty human life and innocent non-human life. Sovereign necropower turns the entire earth into a death zone. The current beast, the US presidential beast, might announce to the UN General Assembly that climate change is the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world. But this destroyer of the earth, as the necroapocalypse would describe him, is spectacularly upstaged, is trumped, if you will, with a masterclass lesson in Manichaean counter ecocide. The necro-apocalypsis, necro-sovereign first turns, as we heard last night, a third of the sea into blood, thereby causing a third of its aquatic life to perish, and afterwards causes the entire sea to become like the blood of a corpse, so that all its remaining life is obliterated. For good measure, every river and spring is also turned to blood. And the horribly polluted water itself is compelled through the agency of its angel, you see, to hail the justice of its divine polluter. You were just, O Holy One, because they shed the blood of saints and prophets. You have given them blood to drink. It is what they deserve. The souls under the altar concurring, yes, O Lord God the Almighty, your judgments are true and just. The sacral orgy of revenge climaxes in the last page. Climaxes in the raising of what Fanon would call the settler's town, but what Revelation calls the great city that exercises sovereignty over the sovereigns of the earth. 1718, the imperial megalopolis in short. And the raising of that city is also the raping of that city. Salvation and glory and power to our God, for he has judged the great whore, and he has avenged on her the blood of his slaves, the heavenly acolytes enthuse. Meanwhile, the voice from heaven that sounds forth as the raising of the colonizer's city commences mingles with the voices of Fanon's damned of the earth as makeshift weapons in hand, they converge on the settler's town. Do unto her as she herself has done, and repay her double for her deeds. She glorified herself and lived luxuriously, inflict on her a like measure of torture and misery. Colonialism is not a thinking machine, says Fanon, a sentence to ponder anew as we writhe in the throes of an unthinkingly initiated Middle Eastern war. Colonialism is violence in its natural state. Fanon also observes, adding, it will only yield when confronted with greater violence. In the necro-apocalypse of John, that greater violence is divine violence. It is the phantasmic counter-violence of the conquered. That too is something to ponder as our self-styled Secretary of War claims apocalyptic legitimation for his campaign of conquest. The War Secretary may not know how to read this war book, but the book knows how to read him. Then I saw another beast that rose out of the earth. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf. And necro-beast tales do not and cannot end happily in this necro-apocalypse. You know, just saying. So
Good afternoon. Oh, thanks. I'm O'Neill Van Horn. I earned my PhD here some years ago, and I am currently, there's a big asterisk attached to this, assistant professor of theology at Xavier University. I want to do something different, so I will. Before that, though, I want to pause and give thanks for the life and ministry of the late Reverend Dr. Tanya Lynn Bennett, whose spirit is very much interlaced with this space. Carpenters, woodworkers, and other craftspeople often like to say, wood remembers. Wood remembers. The tree that grew in this or that direction always wishes to return to this or that direction, warping or bowing, stiff or limber on account of where, how, and how long that tree grew. Wood grain is memory manifest, and wood, even once milled, continues to remember. Worn steps, smooth banisters, and such. Wood responds to moisture, to humidity, swelling or shriveling or cracking with these seasonal shifts. And if this is the case, then this wood remembers the moisture of our respiring. This wood remembers the ruach, the spirit, breath, wind of song. And I know few who sang in this space with greater fervor and care than Tanya. Wood remembers this, the first ordinary apocalypse. I want to do something different, as I said. So but before that, I need to give you a quick backstory for what I'm carrying into this moment. This past year, last June, I was picked off by my university's leadership prior to applying for tenure for labor organizing, criticism of pay inequity, and vocal support for justice for Palestinians. And my university president emulated the coercive and unilateral exercise of power practiced by demagogues near and far, rejecting without explanation the unanimous vote of my faculty colleagues for my immediate reinstatement. Though I remain steadfast in my belief in the value of education, I now have no faith in it professionally, but also my faith in the discourse that this system produces now very much wanes, verging on existence. I've always been a skeptic, but especially so now. All this is to say, I won't read a traditional theory-laden paper with ample citations today. I just can't do it. And my hope is that this is welcomed. My hope is that the transgressive nature of transdisciplinarity will extend to an embrace to non-normative genres too. When I wasn't suspended from my teaching, my courses always, at some point or another, featured a day where I would do an exercise with students called 9 Whys. It's a simple but effective exercise. You ask a question, and then after each response, ask why. Repeat 8 more times. You can do it with any topic or theme, and I recommend that you try it out in your courses or whatever communities you find yourselves in. In my classes, at some point or another, I'd ask my students, why should we do anything at all about climate change? Because we need a planet to live on. Some bro in the back corner would usually respond first. Okay, I'd respond, but why should we care about having a planet to live on? Well, so that future generations can enjoy the planet. Some performatively altruistic student would then volunteer. That's nice, I'd say, before asking, so why should we care about future generations, or why care about anyone else ever? Why does any of this shit matter at all? You see, they'd quickly get exasperated. My point with this exercise was twofold. First, to realize that without a sense of why any of this matters, there's no way there'd be any reasonably effective response to this crisis, that term now an understatement. The why motivates the how, as far as I'm concerned. But second, to realize that that why is almost always describable once taken to some sort of deep enough level as being in some way existential or theological, which is to say that climate catastrophe is more than an ecological concern. Many of you know this already and feel this, that it's spiritual through and all the way down. It's about what actually really truly matters. Eventually, someone would help the class see this by saying some version of, well, because life is sacred and ought to be shared, or because flourishing is good and ought to be extended, or because everyone's beloved, and so on. But after nearly a year of legal turmoil, vocational tumult, and deeper depression than I'd yet experienced, I've truly begun to wonder if I had an answer or any answers to that question, or if I would still believe any of those answers that I had previously offered. What exactly is worthwhile about any of this shit? I earnestly feared that I wasn't really sure, and if I can be perfectly candid with you, I didn't know if I could stay around to pretend that there was. So after a lot of digging and life and community, I set out to write a series of responses in a collection I'm calling Each Ordinary Apocalypse. Apocalypses, already heard a number of times, are unveilings, are disclosures of things as they in some way really are. And so apocalypses are not just massive, but are also minute and mundane. There's some kind of revelation, and I know I'm being flippant and imprecise here, but what I mean is that the unveilings that I'm interested in are the ones that bubble up in the ordinary. I set out to look for them, those moments, those phenomena, those encounters that effervesce. And I found in the sustained practice of looking for them that they can become easier to find. Apocalypses beget apocalypses, just as love begets love. Today, I'd like to share a handful of these essays, which are really just exercises of noticing with you. I invite you to inhabit these stories, these essays, as I tell them. The second ordinary apocalypse. Grown men in bibs. I told you this would be different. The first thing that you need to know is that Cincinnati has its own kind of chili. Here the air quotes are important. Whatever you know about chili, it's not that, I promise you. Let's start with the fact that the chili is served on spaghetti, as in noodles. This is integral. The saucy stuff is tomato-based, spiced with cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, allspice, and all kinds of other stuff that I'm sure a Texan would scoff or worse at. It has ground beef in it. This part isn't weird per se. Over the top of which, though, is featured what would be described by any reasonable person as a literal mountain of cheese, truly. At the downtown East 4th Street location of Skyline Chili, the most ubiquitous Cincy chili chain, quite close to the sterile office buildings of several Fortune 500 companies, you'll find, especially at lunchtime, dozens and dozens of grown and able-bodied men in suits with, in addition to the businessman getup, plastic bibs up. They hold worldly jobs, sending emails and clicking squares on Excel spreadsheets. Important stuff, they'll have you know. Their KPIs are through the roof. They circle back early and often, and their go-to-market strategies are unbeatable. Grindset is their middle name, and they would automate you and I into obsolescence sooner if they could. Of course, these guys make more money in a few years than I will in my lifetime. But also, at least at lunchtime, and maybe others too, if they're into that sort of thing about which I'm neither here to surmise nor denigrate, they don plastic bibs to eat what otherwise and elsewhere would be considered baby food. And sometimes, when I happen to witness this sort of thing, I marvel, much like Mary, who has an unrivaled way of showing up where she's least expected. She, realizing the nature of her child to be who it's written, said, though I prefer to think, sang, my soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. For he has looked with favor on the lowly state of his servant. He has scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. Here in this chili joint, I like to imagine that I'm witnessing the holy restoration of all as foretold by Mary, the reversal of the status quo glimpsed in the casting down of the slack-swearing self-righteous. But woe to you who are rich, for you've received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry, declared the Palestinian itinerant Yeshua post-birth after all. But even if I don't get the chance to witness the liberatory promise of this Jubilee and its awesome fulfillment, hine, behold, let it be known, that I did get to marvel at important men eating kiddie food in bibs who, if only at lunchtime, are once again reduced to toddlers to whom their mothers, I hope, sang. The third ordinary apocalypse, jingles for pets. It usually happens like this. I finally get the door open after fiddling with the keys, stepping into the kitchen before the first one clumsily crashes into my legs, usually directly as if she wants me to trip. The second makes her way down the stairs a bit more lackadaisically, annoyed to have been awoken, but eager for attention all the same. There is no, and according to my partner, there will never be a third cat, which is probably for the better. My mood in this moment, variable, matters not, for invariably I move to song. Nothing impressive, and for their ears only, also for the better, but I'll forego the privacy of this encounter just this once. There's no set tune, the lyrics are always improv. Today's lyrics, for example, sung to our tortoiseshell monster cat, Peanut. Hello, Stinky. Hello, Stinky Cat. Hello, Stinkers. Baby Stinker Cat. She doesn't actually smell, you should know. These cats are probably more well-kept than I. It's just the way that pet names for pets devolve into the absurd, which I don't think I'm alone in. For example, while her government name is Peanut, her aliases now include Peanutty, Peanutty Professor, Professor, the Professor, Nutty, Lil Nut, Young Nut, Miss Nut, Nut, Nutty Girl, Bug, Buggy, and more that I'm probably forgetting now. Endless names. Endless names. Much of my interior life is governed by jingles. Not governed in an authoritarian kind of way, except for the 2-year period where I had the synth line from the 1980 tune Funky Town stuck in my head at some point every single day, which was, not to be too dramatic, torturous. That this period coincided with COVID and also writing my dissertation at this very institution is probably not happenstance. Jingles are how I navigate much of my home life, which is an odd juxtaposition against the seasonal depression I experience, often mostly at home, though I suppose it's not all that odd when you consider the comorbidity of depression with ADHD, the latter of which surely conducts the jingles, sometimes with an air of ragtime and others with a flair for the operatic, and if the latter conducts, well, the former heckles bitingly from the audience. Jingles are just a mode by which I move through the world. I'm in a season of transition right now. The details are unimportant, you've heard a few of them, but the uncertainty that accompanies the liminal often feels disconcerting, stated mildly. Being adrift in this kind of way reminds that we're all rather unmoored, becoming all the more so pending planetary disaster. Without the fallacy of a set course, it becomes clear that making sense of any kind is all midrash. Put in a more secular vernacular, if you please, it's jazz. There's no orchestral score for life, despite what the Calvinists, may preach. Even the most stable, the most sure among us isn't actually so. A house fire or cancer diagnosis or hurricane or slip off a curb reminds us of the improvised nature of our entire existence, always, as Keller reminds, at the edge. Basically, what I think I'm getting at is that all of life is riffing, all of life is jingles, which might be my own midrashic rebuttal to the author of Ecclesiastes, sometimes called Kohelet, who declared, "What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun." Thus this cynic Kohelet scorns, "I saw all the deeds that are done under the sun, and see all is vanity and a chasing after wind." This sometimes I too depressively lament, before remembering that Kohelet is also being a bit cheeky. I learned this from Kenneth Noir. For Kohelet is winking ironically at the reader, for they are indeed writing a novel form of wisdom literature. Kohelet is riffing about the supposed impossibility of riffing. And after all their hemming and hawing, including the rather damn line, "Making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh." Yikes. Kohelet concludes this way: "The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for that is the whole duty of everyone. For God will bring in every deed into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil." Which is to say, should, or more orthodoxly, when judgment comes, may the words of my mouth and the jingles of my heart be pleasing to the divine, for which we have many, indeed endless names. The fourth ordinary apocalypse, turkey vultures and squirrels. I dressed up as a ninja for Halloween several years in a row. As a child, I mean. That's all I ever cared to or really aspired to be. I own dozens and dozens of Hardy Boys mystery books, but I only ever read one, over and over. I knew the story already, which defeats the point of a mystery novella, but I liked it, sue me. I only ate red-flavored candy, all others be damned. And to think that I was surprised by an ADHD diagnosis as an adult. Kids are, though, always kind of weird. There's a spectrum to childhood weirdness, for sure, but kids are always, at minimum, describable as quirky. I think one of the things that makes this so is their, which is to say our odd captivation by the seemingly arbitrary. They, which is to say we, get hooked on the most random stuff, and there's no way to convince them, us, to care about something else, and it feels hopeless trying to get them, us, to cut it out. And why would you anyway? Cue June, my sweet 2.5, and don't forget the half-year-old friend. Maybe something like 3 weeks ago, she saw a turkey vulture in the road, eating a squirrel that was, her words, not mine, flat as a pancake. It's safe to say that that shit rocked her little brain. Because if you go for a walk with June now, you have to decide if you're going to be the one to look up in the sky or down on the road for turkey vultures, or if you sit down to draw with her and ask her what you should draw, you already know the answer you're going to get. And even after your poor drawing of the bald-headed bird and the X's for eyes miscellaneous rodent, if you ask her what else you should draw for her, don't think that your first illustration is going to change anything about her answer. Her parents don't shy away from any of this. In fact, they encourage it. Not in the watch my child's party trick sense so much as an earnest support for her curiosity and awe. Last summer, I witnessed them do this too when she was in her draw animals pooping season, prompted by an encounter with an elephant pooping at the zoo, which, how could you forget that sort of thing even if you wanted to? Sanitization is bastardization. That claim doesn't hold for medicine and other stuff like that, but I do think it's true for just about all else. To marvel at a purified iteration of Earth is not only unhelpful, it's delusional. This is one of the thought patterns that has landed us in this climate catastrophic mess to begin with. Sterilizing our fleshy existence strips our experience of the very matters that enable our existence. To marvel at Earth is indeed to embrace the interconnection of poop and maggots and fungi and duff. To be in awe of these things is not necessarily to praise death per se, which quickly becomes an unbearable political machine demanding more sacrifice by many in the name of productivity or purity or nation for the benefit of select and few others. No, to be in awe of these things is to recognize the matter of death, its material realities, its mattering to our stories. As Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel rightly noted, knowledge is fostered by curiosity, but wisdom is fostered by awe. Forfeit your sense of awe, let your conceit diminish your ability to revere, and the world becomes a marketplace for you. June has no patience for balance sheets or GDP or cost-benefit analysis. She doesn't even care about your line of work even. You may think this is naive or I'm foolhardy for lauding her, but when you have to stare into her glassy eyes as she asks you, in the squeakiest little voice you ever heard, have you seen a turkey vulture? You might just realize, though she does not wander deserts, nor eat locusts, honey, or any combination thereof, that you've encountered a prophet in our midst, reminding of what really matters. I can only hope to have enough time left to practice this awe before I, too, am flat as a pancake. The fifth ordinary apocalypse, the penultimate. Wet clothes. I am for the second time this week, which is to say for the second time in my life, waving a hair blow dryer frantically over my damp clothes, praying for the end of damp. I know that this is wasteful of energy. I know. Never mind, ineffective mostly, but sometimes you do what you must. I'm on a cycling pilgrimage from Canterbury to Rome, which some call the Via Francigena, though I'm hardly an adherent to the prescriptive, especially of a religious sort. And twice this week, I've ridden headlong into serious rainstorms. Long-distance bicycle touring affords many freedoms, of which dry clothes is not one. After today's dousing, I was taken in by some generous, though that word's not enough, Benedictine sisters who opened their guest house to me, sopping, where I quickly, unthinkingly, typical, took immediate advantage of the washing machine therein, because long-distance bicycle touring affords many freedoms, of which clean clothes is only seldom one. Overzealous, typical. I threw in every article in my possession, save a pair to be decent. Naturally, the sisters' more sparing European proclivities mean also a lack of dryer machine, which is totally fine and frankly honorable, except for the odd occasion that you throw in everything you have to the wash, but then have to go to, or maybe just want to go to, or are devotionally keen to go to the sung vespers, which are happening like right now. Hence, rushing to dry a pair of pants, since I assume shorts in this context are inappropriate for this ritual, I think, with this screaming Pantene mini cannon. The irony of rushing to practice contemplation is not lost on me. Needless to say, my prayer this evening is interrupted by smaller, call them concentric, perhaps, prayers, that my soggy ass, sorry, does not discolor the wood of this probably ancient chair behind the almost certain ancient pews. I don't know that God cares about this sort of thing, really, but I'm sure there must be a line about it in the Rule of St. Benedict, maybe a subsection attempting more polite language, but ending up with something even grosser like dank buttocks. In any case, what I'm saying is that there's something needlessly good about clothesline-baked fabric, about towels stiff as a board and just as abrasive. What I'm saying is that the sun practices a kind of ora et labora, prayer and work, that this blow dryer never could. The final apocalypse, at least of this paper. Straight men's hairstyles. I don't like this coffee shop, but my friend is here, and we are writing. Those are two good things, and that's enough for me, especially these days. But just now, across the room, I am witnessing something incredible that I must preserve. I'm here to share it with you. A straight man sits be-headphoned, clacking away at his keyboard. Another straight man, I'm just assuming for both, based on language and fashion and diction and those sorts of things. Another straight man approaches, asking the sitting man something that he does not initially hear, thus taking off the headset. Sorry? He could have chosen to be frustrated, but shows nothing of it. Instead, leaning in with earnestness. The inquirer is interested in the typist's hairstyle, as he wants to have his own cut to that length, but evidently, and I'm just piecing this together, my eavesdropping, is muddied by the usual clamorings of a coffee establishment. He isn't sure how to ask this of his barber. Something about being unsure how to control the frizz. And then these straight men start enthusiastically swapping hair product recommendations for the whole frizz situation before the truly shocking. The inquirer asks if he can take a photo of the ideal hair-having man, which, and I would have thought this absolutely unthinkable, he consents. Then, and I have to keep my jaw off the ground now, he asks for another photo of the other side. Both profiles. Both profiles. Which makes sense since the desirable hair man has a side part. So of course you need a record of both sides to show your hairstylist. And both seem delighted. In other words, this is my letter to archaeologists in the far, far future. Should humanity persist that long, so as to say, despite the wreckage and the poison, there was something needlessly lovely about humans who were, on the whole, good to each other, even strangers. Thank you.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Sorry to roll in. I think that I can say to those of you in the room who have an autoimmune disease, flare no med, and you know why I've been watching online. So um, I have been able to watch online mostly. I missed yours in the transit. But it's been delightful to hear people's papers. Let's see if we can do this together, Dohi, okay? On April 6th, 2026, 4 living human bodies were floating 400,171 kilometers up in the sky, farther than any living bodies had ever been, breaking the record set by humans aboard Apollo 13 on April 15th, 1970. Neither Icarus nor Enoch could be reached for comment. There's one. There's another. Going. Perfect. Jump back 70 years to the successful launch of Sputnik 1 for another record breaker. In the must-write prologue of her 1958 The Human Condition, Hannah Arendt says Sputnik 1 is an event par none, even exceeding the splitting of the atom. Quote, an earth-born object made by man encircled the earth, she said, according to the same gravitational forces that swing and keep in motion the sun, the moon, and the stars. Only time distinguished it from them, as its tour was weeks, while they, from our view, might as well be up there for eternity. The satellite managed to stay in the skies, she muses. It dwelt and moved in the proximity of the heavenly bodies as though it had been admitted tentatively to their sublime company. This is an occasion for unmitigated joy, she admits. Except, well, maybe for the uncomfortable military and political circumstances of the whole affair. What she's really shaken by, however, is a headline in the New York Times, which expresses relief that finally there was a first step toward escape from men's imprisonment on Earth. This sentiment was not unique or uncommon at the time. What is new, she said, is only that one of this country's most respectable newspapers finally brought to its front page what up until then had been commonplace sentiments among more popular discussions, and perhaps buried in less respectable literature like science fiction, which she does say people should really pay attention to understand mass sentiments and mass desires. The everyday feel of the statement does not detract from how extraordinary, in fact, it was in the newspaper. For although Christians have spoken of the earth as a vale of tears, and philosophers have looked upon their body as a prison of mind or soul. Can you go to the next one, Dohi? I did miss, there it is. Thank you. Mind or soul. Nobody in the history of mankind has ever conceived of the earth as a prison for men's bodies or shown such eagerness to go literally from here to the moon. The Apostle Paul could not be reached for comment. Well, maybe he left a note. Well, there are a small handful of New Testament passages that can be marshaled into a loose company. Here is the star, with whom the rapture show does not go on. Probably composed mid-1st century CE, this section of 1 Thessalonians shares some teaching with the assembly about the dead in Christ. Paul does not want them to grieve and be without hope, like those not in the assembly of Christ. He casts a dramatic scene with Christ coming with a cry and trumpets, then the dead rise, and then we who are alive will be caught up or snatched up, harpazo, to be reunited in the air with Christ, and now presumably living again dead. This vision in the skies is offered as an encouragement. Jesus also comforts his disciples at his leaving in John 14. Heading off for his Father's house, he assures them he will come again and take them to himself. These living Christ followers being swept up into the sky in 1 Thessalonians is, of course, not what Arendt means by literally. Yet, little anti-gravity vignette has certainly caused a lot of stir. We're going to come back to that, I promise. Presumably, Arendt is surprised by the scientific drive to leave the only home we have ever known. Indeed, in addition to science fiction, she mentions a funeral monument of the highly influential Russian aerodynamic scientist Konstantin I used to know Russian, Tsiolkovich, maybe, you can see it in writing, who has already, by his death in the early 20th century, been making designs for Mars when working on basic lighter-than-air kinds of flight, in the late 19th century. The funerary monument says, "Mankind will not remain bound to Earth forever." This is the scientist who influences Kolosov, who influences the rockets, who gets some of the space race going. Future man, who trades in the gift of Earth for something man-made, she understands from the scientist, may be as near as 100 years away. This is in 1958. Actually, he would get off-world much faster. Just 11 years later, the US successfully lands a man on the moon. And now there are 27 with or without living or inert cargo out of about 100 attempts. So just about 25% success rate. Indeed, it has been 123 years only since the Wright brothers were able to keep their heavier-than-air powered plane in control and in the air for 1 minute. 123 years to get 400,171 kilometers away from the Earth. The farthest the Wright brothers went that day was 832 feet. I confess, and that's across the land. I confess that during the most recent Artemis II mission, I shared the complicated joy that Arendt felt at Sputnik. I also shared some of her surprise, although in a different frame. Just that. For 10 days, the four, really endearing astronauts sent messages emphasizing looking down at the Earth, and a lot of educational, inspiring messages for the kids that I missed because I was working. Near the end of the mission, as they regained radio contact with the Earth after their swing around the dark of the moon, Christina Conch sent this one that you can see. "It's so great to hear from Earth again. To Asia, Africa, and Oceania, we hear you can look up and see the moon right now. We see you too. When we burned this burn towards the moon, I said that we do not leave Earth, but we choose it. And that is true. We will explore, we will build ships, we will visit again, we will construct science outposts, we will drive rovers, we will do radio astronomy, we will found companies, we will bolster industry, we will inspire, but ultimately we will always choose Earth. We will always choose each other. The split background in the image in front of you is meant to evoke Arendt's point, and one many people feel, that these things of wonder and horror lie close together. This technology enables the spectacular look back to Earth. While people on Earth could see Sputnik with binoculars, there was a little red circle on the newspaper that said that in the New York Times, that you could see Sputnik with your binoculars. Well, you can't see Artemis 2 with binoculars because the distance is so great. But people can look at the moon to synchronize their mutual gaze. And the nuclear cloud, of course, signals the scale and the threat of the contradiction. The whole project is also completely rooted in and ever driven by military, political, and now corporate interests. Some of this is hinted at in the litany of 10 we will statements that are a mix of building things, doing science, doing business, and one thrown in for the kids, we will drive rovers. The word we repeats 17 times. And it is not clear as you go who is the we in each instance. Are they astronauts? Is it the US? Is it Canada? Is it the world? Something does stick out, though. We will found companies and bolster industry. Damn. I have to say, as a biblical scholar, especially with the inclusio, if you can spot it, the we choose Earth, this does feel like a composite or multi-authored text. If you can't pick them out of a lineup, that's Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. I wish the embrace of the corporate new space race surprised me. It does not, of course. Rather, I am surprised by the language of choice. We choose Earth. Literally speaking, are we saying we have a choice now? 123 years after 1 minute at Kitty Hawk? Better, rhetorically, why is this important to say? And repeatedly, that is, that we choose Earth, as the astronauts did in one way or another throughout the entire mission. We choose Earth. All y'all, we choose you. All y'all, we choose Earth. We choose each other. Of course, we know the answer to this one too. These are easy questions. It is the intensity of the current political context of this mission. NASA astronauts have always rolled out inspirational and ennobling language. Again, I did not see all the communications, but it is possible that there is also now a certain freedom of this moment for these NASA astronauts. The Guardian published 2 pieces last week, one reporting that NASA's budget is due to be utterly gutted by this administration very soon. And the other is that these jobs can now easily be replaced by machines next time around. There's no reason to send the humans for this kind of mission anymore. Okay, still, let's linger just a bit longer with the wonder. There's something weirdly religious about space. Mary Jane Rubenstein shows in her brilliant book, Astrotopia, the dangerous religion of the corporate space race. The vastness of the heavens conveys, the AI is listening to me. Okay, fuck you. Sorry. Throw it away. I don't want to break the phone. Thank you. Wow, that was really creepy. Okay. The vastness of the heavens convey eternity, and might as well be so in comparison with us. Space, you can go one more, I think. Joe, he maybe forgot that one. And one more. Perfect. Space consistently hits us with the shock and calls forth our awe. Our glorious, all-giving sun is just one of hundreds of billions of stars in the Milky Way, which is one of hundreds of billions of galaxies in our observable universe, which may or may not be one of the infinite number of universes. And then, typical of MJ, and here you are making a cheese sandwich, nowhere in particular. Space is a mythological project as much as it is science or politics, she argues. And the mythology gives it an aura of grandeur, of goodwill, of heroics, that we can be better than we are when we're on Earth, if we can see the whole. While some of us are lost in wonder, others are using the ineffable pull of outer space towards, this is actually MJ, towards nationalist, military, and increasingly commercial ends. In this new space age, public and private interests are both cooperating and competing to build permanent outposts on the moon, mine water and metals from planets and asteroids, and eventually colonize Mars, all under the seemingly noble auspices of fulfilling our destiny, building a clean and green future, saving humanity. How will the astro saviors accomplish this deliverance? By converting the cosmos itself into capital and conquering space. Rubinstein has the receipts. She has the receipts. Read the book. On the way through neoliberalism, Star Trek, Disney, World War II bombs, and rocket science, she traces extractive logic of eternal economic growth down into the history of manifest destiny and colonization. And thereby also shows how the new space race isn't just rehashing a mythological theme, it's rehashing Christian themes. She wonders, though, whether, given all this, she should give up on space, whether we should give up on space. This world is coming to an end, the Savior cries. Trust in me and I'll bring you a new world where you'll finally be free. Free from death, free from earth, free from gravity, at least most of it, and even free from the international regulation. If that video was playing, which I'm not sure the internet here can do that, but it should play. If that video was playing, you could see the immensity of the space trash in the orbits around the Earth. And as of 2026, Starman, the mannequin sitting in the Tesla, is roughly 162 million miles from Earth and 145 million miles from Mars. It's expected to burn up at any time from the pressure of the UV. There are three crucial pieces that I want to pull forward as we leave Rubinstein. First, the Mars mission is enriching billionaires, not increasing the chances of humans will, as Elon Musk says, bring their consciousness to the cosmos. She is clear about this, and she provides accessible science. So as Catherine said last night, share it with your publics. Share it with your publics. She brings the accessible science along with her religious studies critique. So that's one. Two, she decides to follow along with a group of justice-loving scientists who have teamed up with other artists, diverse disciplines to do space differently. She turns to indigenous, feminist, womanist, Afrofuturist philosophies, artists, and imaginaries to listen to people who might have other voices. And then third, Rubinstein notes that John F. Kennedy ramps up the space race in the context of the Cold War, particularly as it faced its atheist communist adversary. She says, "The nation's old religious imperialism woke up, dusted itself off, and took a sharp vertical turn toward the moon." Thus, the conquest and imperialism turns up and out. I'm going to take these three in reverse order in order to turn us back finally, or ongoingly, to the rapture. First, the turn up. While creation, dominionism, conquest, and missionizing expansion certainly bring the religious and mythic legibility to this too insistently secular and scientific race into space, I wonder about the word savior in this quote, as well as the mostly overcome gravity, as well as Arendt's concern about humans actually trying to escape their natal home. I think that the Christian imaginary of a rapture might help us here. Last year, a group of humanist geographers, like a gift from heaven, published an article in the journal Progress in Human Geography, calling for a gravitational research agenda grounded in post-humanist, post-phenomenological thought that develops an account of gravity's profound influence on all aspects of cultural, economic, and political life. Gravity is a pervasive world-making force that is completely taken for granted. Not political, not contested, it's just there. In bumper sticker physics terms, gravity down. For a layperson's visual, gravity is the effect of mass and energy pressing into the fabric of space-time, often likened to a heavy steel ball on the stretched elastic sheet. Consequently, the observable effect of matter and objects, from buildings and water to bombs and bodies, falling along a curved depression in space-time. For those of you who are really into the new sciences, I'm sorry if I'm behind. I'm following them. You can educate me. Thus, our feet being anchored to the ground is not because of a force pressing on us, but because the ground stops us from falling further. Visualizing this in a cosmic sense and taking up critical space theory with an interest in power, inequality, and justice, we can see that gravity is deeply implicated in the social and political worlds of space that might merit our attention. While perceived as a universal and constant force, the effects of gravity, they argue, are unevenly distributed across society and have been mobilized as a diverse tool to reinforce political power and reproduce inequalities. We don't have time. I don't want to touch the phone. We're fine? I have 5 minutes. Oh, great. Yeah, it's perceived as a universal and constant force, but it's unevenly distributed. The best way to think about this is the flow, right? The flow of the rivers, what goes downstream, right? The injustice that is built into the gravitational flow downstream, right? Or the space junk, that's the orbital, right? That's the orbital issues, right? So they propose 4 frames for developing an ontological account of gravity: talking and living, flows, falling, and orbit. Refreshingly, surprisingly, they include religion and theology among the humanistic and social science fields that might be helpful for framing this ontological approach to gravity. It's very rare, actually, to find that to be true. If you can go ahead, Dohit, the next one. Perfect. Observed within the powerful pull of gravity, so there's your 4. I'm just going to talk about talk, live. That's discourse, right? That's how discourse shapes. That's the one where they see religion mostly sitting. Flows, I already mentioned, like the river. Falling is falling. So that has to do with vertical buildings, other kinds of issues in architecture, for example. And then orbit, we already mentioned. I'm just going to deal a little bit with talking and living. And I like that they say talking and living because they use Bradyati to say we're not going to separate the discourse from the body, right? It's talk living, live talk, right? Okay, so observed within the powerful pull of gravity, the rapture is a notably anti-gravitational force, a reversing of direction from falling down to floating up. Perhaps comically simple, gravity from the Latin gravitas, or weight, is the force that holds us. Rapture from the Latin raptus is what seizes or carries us off. Insofar as the Christian concept of God seizes the believers up into the clouds on a timeline to be determined, and that is much disputed. Gravity down, Christians up. The stubborn reliability and persistence of the downward pull of gravitational force is constitutive to understanding the rapture as an act of God, a miracle that defies the forces of gravity on ever-falling material beings and bodies. Let's go to the next slide. So in terms of talking living force of gravity, it's actually easy to trace the verticality and the volume that comes with gravity. Right? It makes possible expansiveness and verticality. This is the Apostles' and the Nicene Creed, and it's connected to the AI version of the biblical world. All of the images here are from the AI because I wanted to show you that AI makes images like an Elvis on black velvet. I'm just kidding. These are AI images, though. Mapping 1 Thessalonians 4:3-18 onto an ancient cosmological geography, we get a whole lot of up and out and into the heavens. Recall JFK's sharp turn up. Go a little faster. So we see the dead and the living are snatched up. They're escaping the destroyed world, the sinful world, the dying world. It's a hierarchical ontopolitics that have been the gift that keeps on giving in the Christian tradition. And so we can see very clearly that just living talking, we already are seeing something happening in an explanatory way. So turning to the second issue. As I mentioned, Rubinstein turns to indigenous, feminist, womanist, Afrofuturist to try to listen to other voices. I have to say, in the many years I have been puzzling about this text, and I will tell you, it was my job talk for Drew. Not kidding. This place works you. I've been puzzling about this for many years to try to find the right approach in order to push back on the very sturdy, impossible rapture interpretation. Because there really is, from a biblical interpreter's point of view, one thing. He didn't mean that. Or ancient is not like modern. And that's pretty much all you can do. Or you can multiply interpretations. That doesn't help us in this case. We need to make some choices and push back hard, right? So I tried flying. We'll go through these fast. I looked at emperors and got stuck in the Scylla and Charybdis of Paul subverting and replicating empire. I looked at other flyers and got stuck in essentialized identity groups or not sufficiently dealing with the snatching up part. So I have recently come across someone that I'm going to try. And so I'm going to show you a few things, and then we'll close. I invite your feedback. I'm going slowly here because I'm going to try to appeal to Rebecca Cox Jackson, who was born in a free black family in 1795. She founded a black, largely female Shaker community in Philadelphia. Jana Brown has featured her as one of the several black women mystics who traveled the psychic highway of upstate New York. Did you know there was a psychic highway in upstate New York, where utopians were active, that is, utopians of the ecstatic. Remember, Ecstatic is rapturous as well. First, a quick turn to the beginning before a trip back through time. Enoch and Icarus both had technology to overcome their gravity. They both had technology. Icarus failed, his dad didn't. Enoch had winds and clouds. Also, 1 Thessalonians, they have clouds. It's not clear whether they surf up there on the clouds. But surely, next one. Go ahead. Oh, sorry, back one. Perfect. We can see that Paul himself is also working out the technology. So 1 Corinthians 15 is about somebody saying, well, what kind of body? Oh, I don't know, this kind. This will change, and this is how it's going to work. It's like a seed. It's like this. This is technology. He's thinking it through. And the ever-questioning Corinthians are just quizzing him at length, right? They're thinking through the technology. Now you can go, Dohi. Next one. The Left Behind boys, at the beginning of their most recent 2011 attempt to save the franchise, also love technology. These are easily, you can read this yourself, the most exciting days, breathtaking technology and science, and we get to leave soon. I mean, the two of those things being held together is just such a wonderful and stunning contradiction. One more. Keep going. When you go back through time, keep in mind those bookends of Kitty Hawk and now. All of these have lots of technology, right? All of these have lots of technology. Military technology, space race, global communications, global media, all kinds of technology facilitating. Now let's add printing, distribution of books, of Bibles. We've got a lot of technology happening here to facilitate their rapture. Every single one of these gents are multi-million volume bestsellers, including Schofield. Okay, one more. And just a little bit more technology. Go to the next one, Dohi. I know I'm moving you fast. I brought this, 1947, photography allows a panoramic view of the entire biblical history. So you can literally see it from the God's eye view. There's a couple of snaps from it. If you publish study books for the late great planet Earth, if you sit and study all these books and pamphlets and everything that's in your lap, you can get the God's eye view of history from the comfort of your church and your couch and your home. Okay, so let's go see Rebecca. Rebecca Cox Jackson has a journal that she wrote in 1830. And at the time of her autobiography, she's actually doing fairly well. Relative prosperity, she seems to have safety, and especially compared to other black women who live in antebellum America. She lives in Philadelphia, and eventually she's preaching, right? She's traveling around and preaching. I want to say I'm going to just go quickly through these now and hear from you who already know about Rebecca Cox Jackson, because I'm working through her journal, which I just found last week. So I think that this is really where we can go. So I want to look at it in three. We don't have a photograph of her, by the way. I just want to look at it with three frames: technology, perspective, possibility. Technology first. Oh, that's all of Darby's writings, and sitting on top of it are Schofield's writings, and we have one handwritten journal that's been hard to gather together. So her technology is two things: her experience, embodied experience of ecstatic practice in community. She has that technology. And she also learns to read. She learns to read through a gift of God because she doesn't want to rely on her AME brother, elder, anymore. So even reading becomes a gift for her to be able to see the heavens, to go to the heavens, and to control the winds and the rain. And so it's a fascinating, but this is her technology, this writing, but also her body. Next one. So what about perspective? I came across this remarkable passage. She says that she goes up into the atmosphere. In her vision, she sees its bounds. She sees its form. She wonders at it. She knows that the birds can't be up there, and we can't be up there. She knows that it's calm and tranquil, except the weather. There's a whole range of kind of things she sees from above in her vision. The next one. She also gets a little bit annoyed when her community can't look outside themselves. And I mention that because she connects the top-down, above perspective with a very local perspective on the world. That is, she wants to call the community out into the world. And finally, we see a different understanding here of resurrection. You'll see right at the bottom, she's talking about Ann Lee as the second coming of Ann Lee, that the resurrection life of every soul is to be able to nurse at the bosom of the second Messiah. Second one. She also, we're back to the New Jerusalem. Here again, the tabernacle of God is with men. The kingdom of heaven is within you. We've heard this tradition before, right? So I'm trying to think through the ways that she's actually doing something spatial in her thinking, in her rapturous, ecstatic experience. I don't know enough yet. I want to give it the respect it deserves, so I'm working through it. And if you have ideas, I very much welcome it. I want to say Jake. I think she helps us rethink Darby, because he too is not actually in that technological century. He's more like her in certain ways. He's communal. He's called a heretic, actually, like she seems to be, right? There's all kinds, she has been called. There's all kinds of ways, except for his privilege, his literacy, his ability to write and publish and study. Other than that, there's a lot of commonality there. So to conclude, 2 lines. I want to return to, actually we'll skip that. It's a great Arendt quote. Sorry, we can put it back up in a second. So I'm eager to continue to explore Rebecca Cox Jackson and see where it takes us. And so finally, I want to return to Rubinstein's last point. The billionaires are profiting off our love of space. Also, the rapture industry is profiting off of, right, this idea. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and they keep trying to sell it again and again. So I want to give our 4 astronauts a shout out. Is this them falling and catching each other? And then our starman, I want you to see his technology. He needs help to be up there, but it's lonely out in space. Will we find a way to do rapture differently? Heaven knows.
Okay, I'm going to begin. I'm going to begin with a couple of apologies. Apology number 1, the students who are here frequently know that I make it a studious practice and a discipline, particularly when in public spaces, to refer to our faculty and our colleagues with title and name and extend to them the dignity which they have earned and preserve the spaces in our community that we have to preserve. These are my friends. And so it's going to be Stephen, O'Neill, and Melanie. Second apology is the response itself. A response like this, particularly impromptu and on the cuff, really in its structure is a jazz performance, a riff, in response to carefully written and annotated documents that are practically Baroque chamber pieces. So this is going to be jarring. I'm going to take them in reverse order, in part because it lets me open with Melanie, and lets me open with her reflection and her invocation of the name of Mary Jane Rubenstein and her Astrotopia, and express initially, my first thought is a happy damn it. The happy because Mary Jane is a wonderful human being who is a friend, may very well be watching right now. The damn it is because she's certainly on the short list of the greatest impromptu responders working in the academy today, and that's going to be invoked as you hear me lumber through. But I do think there is something in that juxtaposition of technology and utopia that she explores, that you've been exploring, that you've been engaging, and that resonates with us in our apocalyptic visions of this weekend. Notably in that it gives us a very difficult way of locating the cosmos, the heavens in particular. As we travel through, what about heavenly life and what about work from the earth? And also in part because it reminds me of the other moment in history where apocalyptic language about new worlds and new opportunities were invoked alongside the shoulders and on the work of explorers. The invasion of North and South America by the Europeans. What sorts of catastrophes and genocides and horrors will 500 years in the future be seeing in our moment of discovery and exploration as we blithely move through? Leaving aside, and I cannot believe I'm saying that, but leave aside the question of AI and its ethics and its challenges to sentience and to human experience. And further, this exploration of space seems to me to invoke the real challenge that where we keep going, we keep bringing these issues and technologies, that as we invade the heavens, we bring along with them the virus that is us. The fault lies not in our stars, but in ourselves. But as we think through that, and particularly that effective metaphor of gravity, what if the falling and the failing is the point? What if the power of utopia is its persistent refusal and failure, and the gravitational draw of such failure for us to seek something slightly more just? Not soaring victories, much like the space race or any other technology, an exploration filled with the record of persistent failure, but persistent attempt. O'Neill. The theme of the little apocalypse, the non-global apocalypse, but the culmination of individual apocalypses, the non-global collapse, but the culmination of individual collapses. I am reminded, for multiple reasons, from you this weekend, of Timothy Morton's Dark Ecology, and that magnificent moment of the plucking of a grass from a meadow and adapting Zeno's paradox, tearing it into increasingly small pieces and noting that in each one lies the meadow. Is there room for redemption in Schenectady such as that? But rather than really push you on that question, I'm going to join you with a mini apocalyptic story of my own, about the day that I conversed with a dragonfly. It was in the middle of summer, on a vacation. I had just completed the long run for that week. I still run, slowly, alongside the C&D Canal. Sweaty, stung by Virginia and Virginia's sun in every way possible. I walked to the edge of the water and sat down to regain my breath and composure and recenter. A dragonfly landed on a post nearby, and we realized one another's company at the same moment, inches apart. And we spoke. Not with words, because it's a dragonfly, but through the presence that we both shared in our bodies. The dragonfly tensed and said to me, "Do. Are you going to eat me?" And I sat still and said back in turn, "No, at least not right now." And we looked at one another, and my quizzical presence said back to the dragonfly, "Are you going to bite me or fly away?" And the dragonfly, and sitting there as well, said, "No, we're good." And so we sat and noticed one another's colors and variegations and shapes until he could go somewhere else. And then I did too. In the spirit of your non-paper paper, that is my response, O'Neill. Along with the remark, both personal and public, that I am so glad that we had that conversation this morning. And finally to Stephen. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was apocalypsis. What fuels the lake of fire, Stephen will ask before he finishes. Seeing truth itself is terrifying and disastrous. The unveiling is itself an act of violence. And so, Stephen, I'm going to draw a metaphor from our common childhoods of agrarian world, or at least agrarian adjacent, and draw it into the technology of the modern world and confess to you all that I am fascinated with the short film versions put out by Nate the Hoof Guy. He's a farrier, trims cattle hoofs. Frequently goes in, for those who don't know, to take the hoof of a cattle, and as the bone grows, it's got to be trimmed back and shaped, and occasionally gets cracks or imperfections. We'll have a stone wedge into it, producing a lesion underneath the bone of the horn, crippling the cow. And the only solution, of course, is the unveiling, the slow, careful excision away of the bone and the hoof, which are, much like your fingernail, nerve-free, to expose the corium and its soft tissue, to release the pressures, to open the wound so that it can then be healed. And in time, the bone grow back and the cow return to walking. My question, and I think the question that comes to me from your work, Stephen, is not necessarily about, is there violence in the apocalypse? But whose violence? Is it ours? Is it God's? Is it redemptive? Is it constructive? Is the unveiling, is the cutting the work of the harrow or the cultivator, the thresher or the bulldozer? And is such violence always necessary? And to return back to my notion of Nate the Hoof Guy, even when benevolent, is it? Because ultimately, what we can see in the healing of the foot of a cow is an act of mercy, but an act of mercy made necessary by the current structures of large animal horticulture or agriculture and the imposition of the life and conditions that are not normal for that cow. And a life whose perpetuation, let's face it, is to eat that cow. So when we do our little acts of mercy, when we have our moments of injustice that we call out, when and how might we actually be enabling the system itself to continue, even as we work in mercy to catch those wounded by it? Question I think about a great deal, given the responsibility of my work in the training of clergy to heal a broken world. Nate the Hook guy is delightful, happy and charming, Bob Ross-like as he carves away to make the cow move forward. But is his violence veterinary and redemptive, or in the end just as much the perpetuation of the abuse?
Is it on? Yes. Thank you, friends, all of you. Yeah, just very, very quickly from me. First of all, Melanie, a little gem for you, but you may know this already, but the rapture doctrine itself was conceived in the bosom of extreme wealth. So, yeah, you knew that. John Nelson Darby and Jake was remarking this morning how he now finds himself in Darby's old stamping ground. But he was a member of, the Anglo-Irish aristocracy. There was at least one castle in his extended family, and he came under the patronage of the aptly named Lady Powers Court, and it was in Lady Powers Court's, palatial dwelling on her vast estate in the 1880s. I forget the exact year. That he by invitation delivered what he called the doctrine of the secret rapture to an enraptured, Lady Powers Court and other invited members of the Anglo-Irish aristocracy. So that's how it all began. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually spent a lot of time and have spent a lot of time researching parade of men back through and then I decided, the century, the flying century gave me a chance to jump them. And I think what happens, interestingly, as I was saying, is, the question of how much dark gets picked up, actually, by the American scene, and it goes further, I think, is popularized, again, because of all the widespread publishing and the media empire that are the American evangelicals from, right, starting with the study Bibles, and then going into the radio, and then going into television, and here we are to Ronald Reagan, and that goes right along with it. So Darby's before all that, and he's a spiritualist. Not a spiritualist. He has a Holy Spirit kind of doctrine. He fights in his community. He gets, he has a lot of contentious issues. I agree that he's utterly wealthy. And so thinking about the view from above. Let's organize history and let's be able to study the Bible at length. That is a position of privilege, for sure. But I do think, also I wrote a chart where these two figures they're born almost exactly the same dates. They both tour in upstate New York. I'm not saying they influenced or knew each other. I'm saying I love that synchronicity to kind of put her there when he's there. I also want to mention to Rob, thank you, Rob. Part of what I'm after, which I might not have said as clearly, is most of the responses to rapture is to choose earth, Like, so the theological, the ecological, right? It's to choose earth, which is good. And I'm trying to think about how do we do rapture differently, using MJ's idea of how do we do space differently. Because you got a whole lot of folks saying the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed, and you ask them where God is. Like, the heavens are deep in the well, right? And so are we going to leave them behind, right? Are we going to leave them behind? So I'm seeking an ecstatic rapture that doesn't leave the two spaces, that holds them. And so earth alone is not the answer back to heaven over, right? But heaven and the earth can somehow maybe, thank you, I see you.
Can I put a question to O'Neill before we open out? I loved what you were doing. I mean, the theory nerd in me, of course, wants to know whether your concept of ordinary apocalypse was influenced by Kathleen Stewart's, ordinary affect. That's not so important. But as I listened to each sort of mini apocalypse being successively unfolded, I felt, I confess, I felt a little bit like the disciples in the Gospel of Mark, who failed the very first test by asking Jesus, what the parable of the sower means, and he tells them, but he says, you don't understand, even understand that parable, then how are you going to understand all the parables? So I was actually, the first one, I could see the unveiling and the subversiveness of it, and the other apocalyptic moments you recounted, each and every one of them, beautifully articulated. They were more advanced, somehow more challenging for me to decipher as apocalyptic revelations. I mean, at the bottom of my own first page of my paper, I said, now spread vanishingly thin, apocalypse is both everywhere and nowhere. And you seem to be coming back and saying, yes, and that's a good thing. But my question is just a very simple one, basically simplistic. Tell us again what your criterion or what your criteria are for, these ordinary moments of apocalyptic unveiling.
Thanks, Stephen. Oh, goodness. I think in many ways one of the criterion would be something like surprise. I think that happens at the end of that first essay about the men in bibs. I was writing that, and as I was writing it, I kind of had this sense of like, well, of course we're gonna have some sort of unveiling of the slacks-wearing self-righteous, as I put it. And that just felt too easy. It's just too simple of a critique. And then I wondered, as these, what the experience was of these big babies when they were little babies, and did their mothers sing to them? And I think a lot of the essays I've been writing about really truly mundane things like ketchup and vomit and all sorts of stuff is something about surprise, something about wonder, which we might think of as synonymous with enrapturement. And so maybe there's something there about a kind of more immanental notion of rapture. But yeah, that would be my response for now. Keen to hear from folks out there too. Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for these great thoughts. And I have several thoughts that I'm hoping will bring all of what you're already saying together. On the question of wonder, O'Neill, I was really drawn to with your friend Noon. And I've been receiving photos of my child all day from the various mothers who are taking care of him while I'm away. And I think for me, one of the ordinary apocalypses that we all go through is that like you never feel like an adult. Like, oh, actually I thought eventually I'd become an adult and I am not. And that unveiling of the lack of that, but then our resistance to it, that I wonder if there is a politic of childishness that counters necropolitics, that sort of counters the time of coloniality. Like when you are immature, you get to still live with roommates. You don't have to get married. You can sleep in, you can stay up all night dancing. You can lie in the grass and hang out with a dragonfly. Like, what are we trying to, if we're thinking about how do we live differently than the things being unveiled to us as what we've been living in, there seemed to me something there about childishness in a good way that maybe tied several of these moments together. And on that note, I was thinking, Melanie, I'm thinking with the falling, failing. One of the people I've been reading on motherhood talks about the experience of becoming a mother as the experience of falling. And in an essay I'm working on, it brought to mind for me Toy Story. So at the end of Toy Story, as a callback to an earlier scene, Woody is riding on Buzz to like get to the moving truck. And Woody says like, oh, Buzz, you actually are flying. And Buzz, no, Woody, I'm falling with style. And I wonder if like kind of there's a way to hold on to an ecstatic, wondrous rapture that is not flying but falling with style. Or like, what would it mean for us to be falling in the wake of the apocalypse, but with style? Like that there is something to be done in the falling, like a survivance or something. So that's just there. And then I just wanted one more thing for O'Neill. I know you like alluded to the ordinary apocalypse of vocational distress, which you and I have both shared in our academic careers lately. And I was thinking that it seems to me that actually we have an easier time finding solidarity with those hurt by global apocalypse than with one another in the experiences of our ordinary apocalypse sometimes. So I'm thinking about at an institution I taught at during Adjunct Walkout Day, one of the preeminent scholars of post-work Marxism did not walk out. Right? So like, in some ways, we are so actually embedded in the scripts of power that run our ordinary lives. We can be like, I am in solidarity with Gaza, which we should be, but I'm not walking out with my colleague who's being abused. So just thinking that ordinary apocalypse actually has this very politically powerful resonance, even as we're telling very mundane stories. So I just appreciate that.
Hello. Oh, it is on. I have a colleague who will not be named who wrote a book on solidarity who's done nothing in support of me or any other affected colleagues. And so I feel that I love the idea that a paper on gravity might reference Buzz, but not Aldrin Lightyear. There's something really good there. But to commit a grave sin, one of the things to your first question that I thought was the concluding paragraph, forgive me, of G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy. I didn't think I'd reference that in this space, but he has this really marvelous paragraph at the end, and I don't want to paraphrase it because it is really beautifully written, but he's discussing this sort of hidden thing that he can't quite put his finger on when it comes to the person of Jesus. And I'll spoil the ending, but do go read this paragraph. I really think it's stunning. He says something to the effect of, and I would like to think that that hidden thing that I can't quite put my finger on was his mirth or his whimsy or something to that effect. And maybe that mirth, that whimsy is a part of the childlike experience that folks like Jesus and many others have tapped into, and that is the place from which we begin critique of capitalism and so forth.
Just very briefly, I like the Buzz Lightyear. And you maybe I didn't reference it because I had to cut it, but when I was talking about that photograph of the astronauts, there's a book by Henry Nouwen, it's posthumous, it's titled Falling, Flying, Catching. And it's his journals from when he was a trapeze artist. Or he hung out with trapeze artists, he wasn't. He flew with them, the Flying Rodleys, he flew with them a lot. And then he does theological reflection on it. So it includes this kind of trust of the other, right? Trust of the divine, but also trust of the colleague, and the friend in the community. So flying, falling, catching. So that's why I said about that picture, like, is this falling and catching, so that's in the spirit, I think, of what you're talking about.
So I think we're actually over about 10 minutes, but the good news is we have a break. So if you have a question or thought, they're all still here, so come talk to them as they're here. Let me do a couple of shop pieces. Number one, if you go out, you'll notice on the Drew table, there are some goodies, some cookies and brownies and things that were purloined by some people of immense stature in our field, whom I will not name, but I'm thankful for, John and Stephen. And as you are enjoying it, turn around and take a look at the lovely display from Fordham University Press. John Garza is here. They have been a longtime friend of the TTC. Perhaps you'll find something there to take home a little piece of it and read and think about. We will reconvene here again really promptly at 4, and we'll have our last session for today. We've got a whole session tomorrow for thinking about what's showing up in common to these, what you're finding, what you're discovering. So we're going to have a whole space for conversation and reflection then. So let's go to the bathroom, get some cookies. See you at 4.